It often takes the world community many years of retrospective analysis to determine the extent of an individual's contribution to society. To the Vietnamese diaspora, however, Professor Hui's remarkable legacy is readily apparent. Professor Hui was a man of virtue and integrity, with a deep commitment to serve his country, a poet full of patriotic spirit, a revered teacher, a scholar with a wide erudition and an extraordinary memory, an eloquent orator, a prominent politician, a leader with a vision, and a convincing advocate for his cause. In the end, Professor Hui was a tough and resilient political fighter, a strategist with a well-defined policy, who remained active until his last breath.
I did not study with Professor Hui at all, but in the recent past, I have learned many lessons from him, and the most important lesson, which I must remember for the rest of my life, is the lesson in patience. And that word patience, Professor Hui himself has turned it into a living experience throughout his own life, not just a mere lesson in the abstract. Such is the case when he had to deal with all sorts of attacks for his policy. But Professor Hui never responded to those attacks. Some people, who could not take it any longer, encouraged me to attack back. But then Professor Hui said to me, "Do not do it. There is no benefit in it. When people attack and insult me, I have the strength and the arguments to respond to them. Yet why don't I respond? The most important thing to remember is that in the future, there will be times when we will need them, or they will need us. But if we have attacked one another, how then will we be able to sit down together to discuss matters? In this huge struggle, one cannot do it alone. We need many people working together." He had a thorough understanding of the Vietnamese literature, Chinese and French literature, the French language, and later on the English language as well. As a result, everything Professor Hui did represented an academic milestone, and we can use each of these milestones to follow his academic progress about Vietnam. However, what is particularly noteworthy about Professor Ngoc is that he was not exclusively a man of action, and everything that he developed through his thought process he turned into action and performance. The Venerable Tran Van An praised Ngoc Hui's true and brilliant value. He said to him, "What is so regrettable is that if you were free to research and write about Vietnam's culture, your contribution would be so considerable and so beautiful." Professor Hui remained quiet a moment, then replied, "You are right, but given the state of our country, how can I, in all conscience, just sit and do research? It is unfortunate that now that he is gone, we must assess the legacy he left behind. His political struggle has not had the lasting impact and success that his cultural legacy has enjoyed. He devoted all his efforts to his political activities, not leaving enough time for cultural academic research. When he passed away, he left a huge gap in the political arena of Vietnam for today and the future. It is a big loss for the country, but it is not his loss." During our activities with Professor Hui in the New York area, we focused considerable effort on the young adult groups. Whenever we had the opportunity, we invited the professor to speak directly with these youth groups. He shared a lot of his knowledge and experience with them during those meetings. From a political standpoint, we must recognize that Professor Hui had a very long-term visionary perspective. Indeed, patriotism among the refugees newly arrived in the U.S. was at an all-time high. Everyone wanted to return to Vietnam and organize movements of resistance to overthrow the communist regime through violent means. But then, Professor Ngoc Hui argued that we had lost the war in part due to reasons internal to our country, but also in large part due to Western public opinion. Therefore, he focused his efforts on influencing the Western public opinion positively towards the cause of nationalist Vietnamese. Professor Ngoc Hui campaigned tirelessly to establish the International Committee for a Free Vietnam. The gathering at 8200 Westminster Address was held in a solemn atmosphere and was well attended by a large number of respected dignitaries. I was very moved that he had assigned to me the honor of introducing him. That day I said, If Professor Nguyen pursues the literary and artistic path, he will go into the annals of history through the main door. If, however, he continues his political fight like this, he will just become another unknown. Then I saw Mr. Nguyen tearing up. Later he said, "It is true that it is my destiny, and you have read my mind correctly, but still, my job is to fight." Then I asked him, "Why don't you, an educator and elderly professor, pass the struggle on to a successor?" He replied, "I've made many efforts to plan ahead, but so far none have been successful." With each successive visit, as we confided in each other, I came to understand his difficult predicament and suffering. If only there was another person in Vietnam of the same generation as him, who could take on the fight so he could return to his role of theoretician. If only he had been able to play the role of Zhu Liang as master strategist to some Liu Bei and Guan Yu, I think that it would have worked. I must say that he had an extraordinarily strong spirit. He lived almost constantly with the struggle. Whenever we met, we would start with some light conversation for a few minutes, and then he would get right back to discussing the fight. Prior to 1950, I honestly did not know Professor Hui. It was when I joined the Kiet Tien class for young adults in 1950 that I had the chance to meet him, and while attending the course with him, he was the best at explaining political issues. Anyone who wanted to discuss politics with him walked away thoroughly impressed with him. It was to be only one more day before he would die, but he gathered a meeting with us to organize the first annual worldwide conference of the Alliance for Democracy in Vietnam, to be held in the Netherlands. When he landed at the airport in Brussels, he fainted. When we carried him out and brought him to Paris, he was extremely tired. Yet he sat and met with us until 2 o'clock in the morning, when he signaled for me to give him an injection with fortified medicine. By then we had to nourish him with drinks full of vitamins because he could no longer eat. 2 days later he died. The biggest impression on me was to see him overcome with pain. That is, he did not take any pain-killing medication to allow his mind to stay always clear and to fulfill all of his obligations. His 4 speeches were written under those circumstances.
Though he passed away more than 20 years ago, every year around the world, the organizations he founded and his disciples continue to hold memorial services for their leader and teacher. The first Vietnamese version of the documentary movie titled Ngoc, The Man and His Legacy, was received to critical acclaim in 2008 in showings across the United States and in Canada.
After we watched the documentary about Professor Hui, we were truly impressed and appreciative. His patriotism was larger than life, and as a result, we feel that he was a genius.
In my opinion, even though the original film was longer and has now been shortened to just 30 minutes, I found the film to be very interesting and very touching.
On the release day of the DVD about the legacy of Professor Nguyen, we found that the activities associated with the launching of the DVD were very successful. I have also attended several showings of the movie. I have found that compared to meetings organized by other individuals, this event has been successful both in substance and in value. Under any circumstance, all one needs is a patriotic heart to follow the professor's path.
To those who ask me, under what circumstances did Professor Nguyen die and how? I have only one answer. He sacrificed his life for his country. A painting of Professor Huy by artist Vang Ngoc Nam 20 years ago has just recently been discovered and represents the artist memorial to praise his noble qualities and the sacrifices of his life for his country. I made this painting 1 year after the professor passed away. I feel that I have not been able yet to capture all his qualities, of which I wish to mention his patience, his dedication, and his loneliness as he worked tirelessly for his country. He traveled from the U.S. to France and Belgium. He was very much alone in his illness. He was very humble, though he was very intelligent. Whether he encountered important people or little folks, smart people or people of lesser education, the professor would always pay close attention and listen to them.
Professor Huy and Mahatma Gandhi were great leaders of the 20th century because they both believed in human beings, in democracy, in nonviolence, dignity for all, the rule of law, and all of the things that we in Canada and America and the rest of the democratic world believe in. It's true that Mr. Gandhi won in India, and Vietnam is still in the totalitarian gulag, but I am certain that Vietnam will become a democratic country of the kind that Dr. Huy was asking for.
To commemorate Professor Huy's contribution in the international campaign to support a free Vietnam, the governments of several states of the United States of America made the following proclamations.
I, the Vice Mayor of this great city, on behalf of our great Mayor, Mayor Bill White, and over 2 million people, and a great number of that being of Vietnamese descent, we hereby proclaim this day as Nguyen Ngoc Day.
Dr. Nguyen Ngoc, a Vietnamese immigrant and strong proponent of Vietnam's democratization, worked to bring social, political, and economic liberty to his native country. Now, therefore, I, Gregory J. Nichols, Mayor of Seattle, City of Seattle, do hereby recognize Dr. Nguyen Ngoc, and I commend his efforts to promulgate the virtues of freedom for all.
Saint. More than 80 years after they introduced the communist doctrine, the Vietnamese Communist Party has brought the country to destruction and hardship in almost all areas. It has robbed people of their right to freedom, decimated the environment, ravaged the country's natural resources, destroyed the country's moral and cultural traditions, and murdered patriotic citizens. The communists continue to behave cruelly toward their own people, but cower before contemptible foreigners. Seeing the dangers of communism, Professor Huy presented a viable strategy to prevent its expansion, and he believed in the ultimate success of the struggle. As for the policy to carry out the struggle, his inclination was to mobilize the manpower inside the country as the force and impetus to overcome the enemy before seeking any help from the outside world. In a speech in Calgary, Canada, on December 12, 1986, about the prospect of the fight against communism, he prophesied a victory, a complete collapse of the communists if we knew how to use the situation to our advantage. Our sorrow is that he was not there to witness the victory that he had prophesied, the total collapse of the communist regime in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
The image of Nguyen Ngoc, afflicted with cancer and in failing health, struggling on the long road, heedless of rain or shine, to find a way to rescue his country from the yoke of communism, is the very image of love and patriotism of our time. His lifelong dedication is a strong message for generations to come, in Vietnam or overseas, to keep up the struggle for democracy and freedom, to mobilize the public opinion and pressure the communist regime for change. When asked if he were given a second chance, whether he would choose to be Poet Dang Phuong, be a teacher, or be a politician, Professor Nguyen answered,
"Because I live in a Vietnam without independence, lacking freedom, and in a constant state of warfare, I had to enter the political arena, learn politics, teach politics, and lead a political organization. Even if I had a second chance, and the situation in Vietnam was the same, I would still do what I did." To liberate Vietnam, we must accomplish three things. First, we must organize the struggle inside Vietnam. No one other than the Vietnamese people themselves can do it for us. No country can come forward and liberate us out of either humanitarian or ideological concerns. We must lead the fight ourselves to liberate ourselves. Vietnamese who emigrated overseas must mobilize to support their fellow men who are fighting inside Vietnam. Third, we must lobby for an international solution that will be beneficial for us. Those three tasks must be carried out at the same time and must be done properly. Only then will we be able to succeed. Those who love democracy and thrive to bring happiness to the nation should look upon Professor Hui as a role model. This role model was a talented man, kind and generous, with high moral standards, who never played tricks on or deceived others, and loved his fellow men, friends and foes. There are two things we must remember. First, we should never fight against one another because of differing viewpoints or other political aspects. Secondly, Professor Hui never put the interest of political parties or his political opinion above the interest of his country and people. Because of this spiritual frame of mind, Professor Hui was close to Buddhism and benefited from Buddhism within his very core. The message that Professor Nguyen wanted to leave for future generations is that we need to develop our own internal resources so that the framework of democracy is based on the strength of our Vietnamese nation, and this strength can liberate our country to become a powerful nation in the world.
Someone asked the professor, "When you invite someone to join the Alliance for Democracy in Vietnam, what are the benefits for that person?" He replied, "Not only will you gain nothing, but you will need to devote a lot of your own efforts, and even possibly lose your life. The only thing you will accomplish is your job for your Vietnamese homeland."
We want you to hear Professor Hui's words, his last words. The dissolution of the communist regime of Vietnam will require much more effort, and each one will contribute differently to this effort. Some will work actively, others more passively. Some will choose the subject of religion, others the issue of human rights. Those in the community who work together must be considered as comrades. If they can't be comrades, then call them companions, but we must always respect one another.
Professor Nguyen was a man of integrity, with an unsurpassed sense of dedication. He was a skillful political leader, with a vast erudition and unparalleled foresight. He struggled tirelessly and skillfully, successful in his lobbying efforts, convincing his audience with his honesty. He looked at organizations only as a means to achieve his goals. He always put the interest of the nation first, and served his country until his last breath. Those are some of the many comments bestowed upon him during his life as well as after his death. A revolutionary, Mr. Lee Dam-ah, stated, "Nourish the body, you become a slave. Nourish the brain, you become a man. Nourish the spirit, you will become a saint." Nourishing his body was never Mr. Nguyen's primary concern. He did not nourish his brain to become arrogant of his knowledge or talents. He dedicated his life to the service of his country. He only nourished his spirit and became a saint.